My name is Matt Ellsworth. I am a partner at 500 Startups. I've been in VC and startups for quite a long time. I'm actually, most recently was based in LA and Silicon Valley before that, making the transition over to France. So it's good to be here, but my French is terrible so far. So I'm going to spare you guys that, and we'll do this in English today. And I'm joined today by the new director of French Tech, Kat.
The French Tech mission, Matt.
French Tech mission, my bad. Okay, good, perfect. Let's start things off by answering a question for a foreigner. What is French Tech?
Oh, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? So, I mean, it's been a little complicated having to sort of break this down, but really, there are two things. One is French Tech, La French Tech, which is actually just like a nickname for the French tech ecosystem, no matter who is in it, whatever nationality they may be, wherever they are, wherever they come from. And then there's this other thing, the thing that I'm actually a director of, which is not the French Tech, which is the French Tech Mission, which is a government-led team that is designed to bolster it. And in 2018, our objectives are to make sure that we support startups that are going for growth that is global, that is massive, and that is a vector of positive change for the country.
Okay, great. And how is that different than what the strategy and the roadmap has been thus far? Is there new things that you're going to be doing, or is it pretty much business as usual?
No, I think it's changed a lot. I mean, you have a completely new context, you have a new government, you have a sort of new ecosystem to a certain extent. So one of the biggest things that has changed is really the problems that we're solving. Back in 2013, when the team was first set up, the problems were, we're talking about a time that there's an enormous amount of French bashing. So a lot of French people who weren't particularly, well, on both sides of the fence, right? Even for French people, weren't particularly proud at the time to say they were from the French tech scene. Startups were a completely esoteric topic. And so this segment of the country, which is super strategic, was actually relatively neglected. And at that time, because the startup scene was so young, we were talking about getting people to start companies. So there's a huge emphasis on starting, and there's a huge emphasis on seed capital as well. And today, the thing that's changed the most as well, seed is not as much of an issue as it was back then. The issue is less getting startups off the ground than getting them into orbit, getting them to go international, since that's what we were talking about a bit earlier. Also we're talking a lot about scale-ups right now. So scale-ups is basically what we're saying is that we've pumped in a lot of support and a lot of aid into an early stage, and then they go up, and then all of a sudden they hit Series C, and you have a graduation rate of roughly just 1%, as opposed to say 14% in the US. So that is the specific problem that we are going to be going after.
Okay.
We're going to be going after it. I mean, it was a sort of really great segue that we had that panel just before, because one of the biggest pillars, I think, of French Tech 2 is going to be talent, both acquiring it from abroad, we don't have it here, and also developing it locally. We're still in the process where we're interviewing quite a lot of founders and trying to figure this out, but what we're hearing right now is that there is a huge gap at the C level, so also C and VP, so the VPs of engineering, VP of product, CMOs, that kind of thing. And then also a pretty big gap in terms of product management. And then there's also growth. How do we give greater market access to our scale-ups? So both dropping, using the wealth of the state to be able to drop barriers for internationalization, whether that is culturally or also materially. And then there's also unlocking the market that we have here. Quite a large chunk of our startups are actually B2B. And so if that's the case, and you have a lot of, let's say, big corporates where that market is still locked, we have a role in sort of helping open that up. And then there's also pro-government services. So we've started that a little bit already. I mean, everyone's heard of the French Tech Visa, for example, or maybe French Tech Central. But really, how do we as government become a much better sidekick or better partner when it comes to startups and their growth? And then the fourth pillar is really on community. So the first version of French Tech was very strongly dedicated to community. And now the question is, how do we help French tech communities all around the world become more globally connected, vibrant, diverse, inclusive, without us necessarily managing them top down, but actually sort of giving them both the tools, the freedom, the network to be able to do so.
Okay, great. So there's a couple things I want to unpack there, but let's first start talking about English. I think this is actually the first time that a director of the French Tech Mission has been interviewed in English. Is there something historical there? What do you think the role of English is moving forward? And kind of segueing off of the last panel that was just up here as well.
Sure. So, to go back again to the time that the French Tech Mission was created, it was around the time that, again, there was a bit of French bashing, lots of French people around the world who weren't feeling particularly proud at the time. And so the key word at the time, and that you were hearing a lot, was federate. You're hearing the word of federate. So how do we bring people together? How do we get them? How do we rally them behind this beautiful banner, which is French Tech, and give them something to be proud of, and have them talk about their country and things like that. So the primary audience, to a certain extent, was internal. People were speaking in French all the time, including people on my team, because we were speaking to each other. But now that, given everything that French Tech as an ecosystem and as a team has accomplished, now we're speaking to the world. And we have quite a lot of things to say.
Okay, perfect. Do you see an interesting contrast there versus, say, the US, where the administration that's there right now is actively basically against bringing in international talent, whereas Macron has been very vocal and France has been very vocal about attracting talent. Do you see some kind of comparisons there?
I mean, so one thing is sure, I definitely feel like we have an amazing window of opportunity because, we're talking about, Trump's America and, and Brexit as well. So the two ecosystems that are traditionally really strong today are culturally have been weakened to a certain extent. But actually, I would ask you that question, Matt. You're the American here. How do you see now that you're here in France and seeing what's been happening and the sort of shift in discourse?
Yeah, it's definitely been an interesting learning experience. I would say that I don't have an insane grasp on or a complete grasp on the French ecosystem, but I've been to a lot of events in other cities as well while I've been here, and every conference I go to, people are talking about how Paris tech scene is starting to light up, and France's tech scene in general is starting to light up. And then I would say that the handful of entrepreneurs that I do know here and the people that I've met so far have been extremely sharp. And what I think is kind of interesting is just to see how French culture sort of influences the tech scene. So maybe you could talk a little bit more about that, because there's obviously some big key differences there.
Yeah, sure. So I'm I think I'm going to put myself in the semi-French category. So I'm going to be looking at it from both an insider and as an insider and an outsider. It's hard to go into without going into full caricature, but I would say there's one aspect that is cultural, which is, I don't know, I feel like the French have a love life like no one loves life, you know what I mean? Yeah. And working in one of our offices is in Station F, and we've spent quite a lot of time in other startup offices. Something that you almost never see, very, very rarely, are people eating lunch by themselves, like some lame sandwich in front of their laptop. Yes. You don't see a lot of that. So tech isn't really an end in itself, and people are still very much camaraderie and life are still things that are quite important. So that introduces a certain sort of natural harmony and equilibrium that you have already instilled in French culture, whereas let's say in the US, there's quite a lot of hype about meditation and all those sort of things that are less natural or native to the culture. A second thing would probably be, I'd say around the culture of haute couture. You have it, and I'm not just talking about, Dior or Yves Saint Laurent. I'm also talking about our engineers. So we have, we're definitely, have some of the best engineers in the world. Don't need to go into that. It's pretty well known. There is a bit of a downside to that, which is that engineering or tech doesn't necessarily mean entrepreneurship. It doesn't necessarily mean product. So there are a lot of shifts. There's a lot of sort of cultural interaction between those two worlds that's happening right now as well. And deep tech is a topic that's very, very important for us in that regard. I think the third thing would be values, right? Like, I know we've been talking a lot about tech for good and things like that. It's been a big discourse, especially for our president. But in France, I feel there's a general awareness towards impact, where we don't necessarily see it as vertical. And I feel that there's just a general awareness in most French founders, and it's been that way historically, that it is part of our responsibility to leave the country, if not the world, a better place than it was when we first found it.
Okay, cool. And then I guess another big difference that I've seen from the US and France is that you guys like healthcare and think everybody should have it, so that's kind of cool. I'm excited about that. Another thing that you had talked about briefly, but I think we should talk about a little bit more, is some of the challenges that B2B startups face in France today. And a couple of my meetings revealed this as well, which I thought was interesting, given I had a background in sales. Some of the startups I was talking to were saying, often we have to build a product, go to the US and sell companies in the US, only to come back and sell companies in France. Can you speak a little bit more about that, and then possibly some things that we might be doing to address that in the future?
Well, I mean, it's just really, there's a bit of it that's just related to sort of market maturity, and also, I mean, if you want to go back to culture, there's also a culture and threshold when it comes to risk, which in France is, has been notoriously low in big corporates. And so that's sort of something that we're dealing with right now. And so what you're seeing when we're talking about, startup corporates, you're seeing a lot of POCs, you're seeing a lot of startup competitions, you're seeing a lot of accelerators, but it's true, you're not yet seeing a lot of real deals getting signed and things like that. I think those are enormously complicated topics in the sense that, let's say, so it's a weird expertise to have, but I've actually done an enormous amount of work on procurement. And it's not just as simple as telling a CEO like, hey, you got to work with a startup now. There has to be like a lot of endemic change in terms of procurement, and then risk thresholds, and then the impact that'll have on IT, and the impact that'll have on legal, and so on. So we're aware of what it takes. But I think that's also why it's something, it's a message for us that has to be very strong, because it's just one of those things that's not going to get fixed bottom up, and where you're going to need to have CEOs that are going to have strong courage to be able to fix that.
Okay, excellent. And when I was reading about French tech, one of the kind of responses I had seen online, or a contention online, is that rather than have the government organize French tech, that maybe it should be more of an ecosystem-based thing. So how do you respond to that contention?
Yeah, I mean, it makes total sense. So the question is really, this is very French to say, but the question is really, what is the question? Is the question that the French tech mission should be given to the ecosystem, and it should be their responsibility to carry out our duties? So you break that down, and the first question is like, all right, well then who is the ecosystem? Who do you give it to? Is there a democratically elected body? Do we know people that are going to represent the best possible interests of the ecosystem? How can we tell? How will we decide who to give it to? And I think the second question is, well, what are we going to give? I mean, this is like my first role in government, right? And I've spent the first 3 weeks getting to know everyone, not just in the team, but inside the larger ecosystem. And if you take away the Ministry of Internal Affairs and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, you take away the visa. You take away our capacity to mobilize internally and to sort of change mindsets. And you take away a large potential chunk of transformation. You take away the hubs abroad and things like that, and you sort of take away our ability to support export. You take away I mean, let's say you take away the Ministry of Economic Affairs, essentially, where we're kind of nested right now, and you take away an enormous amount of economic intelligence that is being used for us to inspire actions. So at the end of the day, you take all that away, and the ability to sort of, you know, also the thing that I was saying on services, and what you've got left is community. And that's something that we've never taken, I think, as far as I know. You know, French Tech and the French Tech mission are two distinct things completely. And community has done a fabulous job all on its own without us necessarily poking our head in it.
Mm-hmm. So the roles are kind of different, right? The roles,
pretty different, I'd say.
Okay. Great. And then I know I've learned a little bit from our talks prior to this about kind of the role that diversity has played in like the French tech scene versus the US. Obviously in the US there's been a whole lot of shake-up in a lot of different ways and a lot of focus on diversity, and still a lot of work to be done. When you speak of diversity in like French tech, is that same way that you're speaking about in the US, or what is the difference there?
No, and I get into these like awkward conversations about that all the time. So diversity in France is probably closer to the American understanding of equal opportunity. So, and this is, anyway, this is the prism that we're using to analyze it, anyway, to deal with the topic in the French Tech mission. It's about the fact that everybody is welcome to join the French Tech ecosystem. It doesn't matter, you know, what country they're from, what language they speak, what gender.
Even dumb Americans?
Maybe even dumb Americans. Although I'll have to,
yes.
I have to like check that one. But no, but seriously, and especially, and one particular barrier that we want to address is also the economic gap. You know, there are lots of minorities we're talking about, and that's another thing. So diversity is really about making, you know, the ecosystem so much more powerful and so much more open, because we're willing. And we want to find and take the best regardless of where they come from. And if there is a barrier, if that barrier is geographic, if that barrier is financial, regardless of what it is, if it's preventing us from getting, you know, the best potential talent, then it is definitely our prerogative to try to break it down.
Okay, and is the diversity fund that you guys have like related to that then?
Yeah. So there's a diversity fund, and it has actually doubled. It was run first as a sort of pilot, mostly for Île-de-France, so the region of Paris, and it's doubled to be able to extend it to the rest of the country.